The screech of jet engines at dawn should have been a warning. At Oceana Naval Air Station, Virginia, the sound meant power, raw, untamed, and deadly. F-35. Lightning IIs lined the tarmac like sleeping predators, their sleek frames catching the first pale light of morning. Steam rose from the hot asphalt as ground crews moved with practiced precision, fueling, loading, preparing these $30 million war machines for another day of training that separated the elite from everyone else. But on this particular morning, as the base stirred to life under a blood-orange sky, no one paid attention to the figure in faded coveralls pushing a munitions cart toward the flight line. No one noticed the way she moved, steady, deliberate, with a precision that belonged to someone who had once commanded respect instead of loading ordnance. No one saw the small scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible beneath her safety helmet, or the way her eyes automatically tracked every aircraft movement with the instincts of someone who had once sat in those cockpits instead of servicing them. Staff Sergeant Emma Ace Rodriguez was invisible, exactly how she wanted it, exactly how it had to be, because 3 years ago she had been someone else entirely, someone whose call sign was whispered in briefing rooms and whose name appeared on mission reports that would never see daylight. But that was before the incident, before the cover-up, before her wings were stripped away and her future became a file buried so deep that even she sometimes wondered if that person had ever existed at all. Now she was just another crew chief, another pair of hands in coveralls, another forgotten face in the endless machine of naval aviation. She loaded weapons, checked systems, and kept her mouth shut. She had learned that silence was survival, and survival was all that mattered when you had an 8-year-old daughter depending on you and nowhere left to fall. What no one knew, what no one could know, was that the quiet woman loading missiles into million-dollar fighters had once been the Navy's youngest female fighter pilot, the first woman to fly combat missions in the F-22 Raptor, the pilot who had earned a call sign that made enemy radio chatter go silent with fear. What no one suspected was that in less than 2 hours, when a cocky test pilot climbed into his F-35 for what should have been a routine training flight, he would speak 2 words that would shatter 3 years of carefully constructed invisibility. 2 words that would make him freeze in his cockpit like he'd seen a ghost. 2 words that would remind everyone on that base that some legends don't die. They just wait for the right moment to prove they were never really gone. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the flight line. Emma adjusted her tool belt, checked her manifest one final time, and began walking toward the aircraft that would change everything. She had no idea that by noon, her secret would be out. She had no idea that her carefully protected new life was about to collide head-on with the warrior she used to be. She had no idea that some ghosts refused to stay buried, but the Navy was about to remember why they called her Viper 1. Before we dive into this story of courage, redemption, and a warrior's fight to reclaim her sky, make sure to subscribe so you never miss these incredible tales of military heroes. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And what's your favorite military aircraft? The F-35 Lightning II, designated Ghost Rider, sat gleaming under the Virginia sun like a technological marvel wrapped in stealth coating. Emma approached the aircraft with her munitions cart, checking her tablet for the weapon loadout specifications. 2 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, standard training configuration. Nothing complicated, nothing that should draw attention. She had perfected the art of being unremarkable over the past 3 years. Keep your head down, do your job, don't engage unless spoken to. It was a survival strategy that had kept her daughter fed and kept the questions at bay. But it also meant enduring the casual dismissal that came with being seen as just another enlisted technician in a world that worshipped pilots. "Hey, Rodriguez!" The voice cut across the flight line with the kind of authority that expected immediate attention. Emma looked up to see Lieutenant Commander Jake "Hotshot" Morrison striding toward her aircraft. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never having been told no, Morrison was the Navy's newest golden boy. Fresh from the test pilot school at Patuxent River, he carried himself like someone who believed his own press releases. Behind him followed his usual entourage, junior officers eager to bask in reflected glory, maintenance chiefs looking for favor, and a small crowd of aviation enthusiasts who had somehow gained access to the flight line for a morale visit. Morrison loved an audience almost as much as he loved reminding everyone of his superior position in the naval aviation food chain. Emma straightened, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, sir?" Morrison stopped beside the munitions cart, his helmet tucked under his arm, aviator sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. He gestured dismissively at the missiles she was preparing to load. "Make sure those are seated properly, Sergeant. Last thing I need is ordnance rattling around because some crew chief got sloppy." The words stung, not because they were particularly harsh, but because of the casual assumption behind them, that she was incompetent, that she needed reminding about basic weapons loading procedures, that her 3 years of flawless service records meant nothing compared to his perception of her capabilities. "Roger that, sir," Emma replied, her voice steady. "I'll double-check everything." One of Morrison's followers, a young ensign with fresh bars on his collar, snickered. "Bet she's never even seen the inside of a cockpit, right, sir? Probably thinks the stick is for hanging your flight suit." More laughter rippled through the group. Morrison grinned, clearly enjoying the moment. He looked Emma up and down with the kind of assessment that reduced her to a collection of assumptions: female, enlisted, ground crew. Nothing that warranted respect. "You ever been up in one of these birds, Rodriguez?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "Ever wondered what it's like to pull 7 Gs? To feel that raw power between your legs?" Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had pulled 9 Gs in an F-22 during a combat maneuver over Syria. She had felt the crushing weight of acceleration while engaging 3 enemy MiGs simultaneously. She had experienced power that Morrison couldn't begin to imagine. But she said nothing. "No, sir," she lied smoothly. "I just load them and send them on their way." Morrison nodded with satisfaction, as if her response confirmed everything he believed about the natural order of military aviation. "That's right. You keep 'em flying, we'll keep 'em fighting. Division of labor, Rodriguez. Everyone has their place." A few yards away, Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen watched the interaction with growing irritation. Chen was old-school Navy, 26 years of service, and she had little patience for officers who treated their people like furniture. She'd been observing Rodriguez for months, noting things others missed: the way she moved around aircraft with unconscious familiarity, the precision of her maintenance work, the quiet competence that spoke to experience beyond her current rank. "Sir," Chen interjected, stepping closer, "Rodriguez is one of my best crew chiefs. Never missed a deadline. Never had a safety violation. You can trust her work." Morrison waved dismissively. "I'm sure she's fine, Master Chief. I was just making conversation." He turned back to Emma with a patronizing smile. "Nothing personal, Rodriguez. I just like to know my aircraft are in good hands." Emma nodded again, swallowing the response that wanted to escape. She wanted to tell him about the time she'd landed an F-22 with a damaged engine and hydraulic failure. She wanted to describe the feeling of going supersonic in hostile airspace while enemy surface-to-air missiles tracked her every movement. She wanted to explain that his precious F-35 was nothing compared to the machines she had once commanded with deadly precision. Instead, she simply said, "They are, sir." Morrison was about to respond when his radio crackled to life. "Ghost Rider, this is Tower. You're cleared for taxi to runway 27. Weather update shows favorable conditions for your training exercise." "Roger that, Tower," Morrison replied, clipping the radio back to his flight suit. He looked at Emma one final time. "Better get those missiles loaded, Sergeant. Wouldn't want to keep the real pilots waiting." As Morrison walked away, his entourage trailing behind like remoras following a shark, Emma felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest. It wasn't anger. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was determination, the same quiet resolve that had carried her through flight school when instructors said women couldn't handle high-performance aircraft. The same steel core that had sustained her through combat missions where failure meant death. She had chosen this life of invisibility to protect her daughter, to build something stable after everything fell apart. But watching Morrison's retreating form, listening to the echo of casual disrespect, Emma felt something stirring inside her, something that had been dormant for 3 years but was far from dead. Chen approached, her expression sympathetic but professional. Don't let 'em get to you, Rodriguez. Hotshots like that come and go. Good crew chiefs are forever. Emma managed a small smile. I'm fine, Master Chief. Just doing my job. But as she turned back to the missiles, checking connections and verifying safety protocols with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, Emma Rodriguez was thinking about Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison. She was thinking about his assumption that she had never seen the inside of a cockpit. She was thinking about the casual way he had dismissed her capabilities. And deep down, in a place where her old call sign still lived, something was beginning to wake up. The F-35's engines would start in 43 minutes. Morrison would taxi to the runway in 51 minutes. And somewhere around the 55-minute mark, he would key his radio to request clearance for takeoff. That's when he would hear two words that would change everything. That's when the ghost of Viper 1 would remind everyone that some legends never really die. They just wait for the perfect moment to prove that respect isn't given based on assumptions. It's earned in the sky. Emma worked in methodical silence, her hands moving with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory older than her current assignment. Each missile was checked 3 times, connections verified, safety pins properly positioned, electronic systems tested. It was routine work, the kind that should have been invisible to anyone watching, but Master Chief Chen had learned to notice things others missed. Rodriguez, Chen called softly, approaching the aircraft. Mind if I observe? Got some new crew chiefs coming in next week. Could use someone to model proper procedure. Emma looked up, a brief flicker of something. Wariness? Recognition? Crossing her features before settling back into professional calm. Of course, Master Chief. What followed was a masterclass in ordnance handling that Chen had rarely seen outside of weapons specialist schools. Emma's movements flowed like a dance she'd performed countless times, but there was something more. She anticipated system responses before they happened. Her hands found connection points without looking. When she spoke about missile guidance systems, her explanations carried the kind of detailed understanding that typically came from flight training, not ground crew experience. The AIM-120's active radar guidance kicks in at terminal phase, Emma explained to the imaginary new crew chiefs, running her hand along the missile's sleek surface. But the pilot can go pitbull early if the tactical situation requires immediate autonomous engagement. Depends on rules of engagement and threat assessment. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. Pitbull was pilot terminology, the radio call indicating a missile had gone active on its own guidance system. Ground crew typically knew the technical specifications, but they didn't usually speak an air crew language with such casual familiarity. You sound like you've spent time around weapons systems officers, Chen observed carefully. Emma's hands stilled for just a moment. You pick things up, working around pilots for a few years. They like to talk about their toys. It was a reasonable explanation, almost convincing. But Chen noticed the way Emma had automatically positioned herself to maintain visual contact with all aircraft movement on the flight line, a habit that spoke to situational awareness training far beyond what crew chiefs typically received. She noticed the unconscious way Emma adjusted her stance when aircraft engines spooled up, the automatic flinch that suggested someone who had once sat behind those engines rather than just servicing them. 20 yards away, Lieutenant Morrison was conducting his pre-flight briefing with characteristic bravado. His voice carried across the tarmac as he gestured expansively at his F-35, explaining the day's training mission to his small audience of junior officers and visiting dignitaries. Today we're running air-to-air combat scenarios, Morrison announced. F-35 versus aggressor aircraft, testing the Lightning stealth capabilities against legacy fighter tactics. The whole point is to prove that 5th-generation technology makes traditional dogfighting obsolete. Emma's tool slipped slightly, a tiny deviation that only Chen caught. When Morrison continued his briefing, describing energy management and beyond visual range engagement tactics, Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The key is maintaining standoff distance, Morrison continued, clearly enjoying his role as instructor. Why get into a knife fight when you can kill them from 50 miles away? Air combat has evolved past the Top Gun nonsense. It's all about sensors, stealth, and superior technology now. Chen watched Emma's reaction carefully. There was something in the way the younger woman held herself, a tension that suggested Morrison's casual dismissal of close-range air combat struck a nerve. When Morrison laughed about legacy tactics, Emma's hands clenched briefly before resuming their work. "Something wrong, Rodriguez?" Chen asked quietly. Emma looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "No, Master Chief, just focused on the work." But Chen had caught something in Emma's eyes, a flash of what looked suspiciously like professional disagreement. The kind of expression that belonged to someone who knew Morrison was wrong, who had experience that contradicted his confident assertions. A young airman approached, tablet in hand. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I've got a question about the missile interface protocols. The manual says one thing, but Senior Chief Martinez told me something different about the targeting system initialization." Emma straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. "What specifically?" "The active guidance system. When does the missile actually go autonomous? Martinez says it's pilot-controlled throughout the engagement, but the tech manual suggests there's an automatic handoff point." Emma was quiet for a moment, and Chen could almost see the internal calculation, how much knowledge to reveal without raising questions. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to surprise even her. "It depends on the engagement profile and the aircraft's combat systems," Emma said, her tone shifting into something that sounded remarkably like an instructor addressing a student. "In most scenarios, the pilot maintains control through mid-course guidance. But if the aircraft is performing defensive maneuvers or if multiple targets require engagement, the missile can be released to autonomous guidance earlier. The F-35's integrated targeting system can manage up to 8 simultaneous engagements while the pilot focuses on threat evasion." The airman blinked, clearly not expecting such a detailed response. "How do you know all that? I thought crew chiefs just—" "Technical manuals," Emma interrupted smoothly. "Read everything I can get my hands on. Helps me do the job better." Chen made a mental note. Everything Emma had just described was accurate, but it was the kind of systems knowledge that typically came from advanced flight training, not technical manuals. The integration between pilot and weapon systems that Emma had described wasn't something you learned from reading. It was something you learned from doing. Morrison's voice carried over again as he wrapped up his briefing. "Any questions about today's mission parameters?" A junior officer raised his hand. "Sir, what if the aggressors manage to force a merge, get inside the engagement envelope?" Morrison laughed confidently. "Won't happen. The F-35's stealth and sensor suite make close-range engagement virtually impossible. But if somehow, and I mean somehow, an enemy fighter got close enough for traditional air combat maneuvering, well," he shrugged. "That's why we train. Adaptation and improvisation." Emma's wrench tightened with enough force that Chen heard the metal protest. When Morrison added, "Of course, real combat isn't like the movies. It's not about individual pilot skill anymore. It's about technological superiority." Emma set down her tools entirely. "Problem?" Chen asked. Emma looked toward Morrison's group, her expression unreadable. "No problem, Master Chief. Just different perspectives on air combat doctrine, I guess." "You have thoughts on air combat doctrine?" Chen's voice was carefully neutral, but her interest was sharp. Emma caught herself, the professional mask sliding back into place. "I listen. Pilots talk. You pick up opinions." But Chen had heard something in Emma's voice that sounded less like second-hand opinions and more like first-hand disagreement, the kind of conviction that came from experience, not observation. A radio crackled nearby. "Ground control to Ghost Rider. Your aircraft is ready for pre-flight inspection. Crew chief has completed ordnance loading and systems check." Morrison approached the F-35, his swagger undimmed by the technical discussions. He conducted his walk-around inspection with competent efficiency, checking control surfaces, intake screens, and weapons pylons. When he reached Emma's workstation, he paused to examine the missile connections. "Looks good, Rodriguez," he said with the kind of casual approval that suggested he'd expected less. "Clean installation, proper safety protocols. Maybe you're not just another wrench-turner after all." The compliment was backhanded, wrapped in assumptions that made Chen's teeth clench, but Emma simply nodded professionally. "Thank you, sir. Aircraft is ready for flight operations." Morrison was climbing into the cockpit when his radio operator called out a final briefing note. "Sir, Aggressor aircraft are reporting mechanical issues. Looks like you might be flying against the backup adversary instead. What's the backup bird? Morrison asked, adjusting his helmet. F-22 Raptor, sir? Pilot call sign Phantom. Should be an interesting matchup, 5th generation versus 5th generation. Emma froze. Chen, watching carefully, caught the moment of absolute stillness that passed over the crew chief's face. It lasted only a second, but it was unmistakable, the expression of someone who had just heard a name that carried weight. Personal weight. Something wrong, Rodriguez? Chen asked quietly. Emma shook her head quickly. No, Master Chief. Just, the F-22 is a formidable aircraft. Should be a good training exercise for the lieutenant commander. But Chen had seen that look before, in the eyes of veterans when old unit designations or call signs surfaced unexpectedly. It wasn't casual interest. It was recognition. As Morrison's F-35 began its engine start sequence, Emma stepped back to the safety line with the rest of the ground crew. Her posture was correct, professional, exactly what it should have been. But Chen noticed her hands, hanging at her sides, had unconsciously curved into the shape that pilots use to grip a flight stick. It was a small gesture, meaningless to anyone who hadn't spent decades around aircrew. But to Chen, it was a crack in the carefully constructed wall Emma had built around her past. Morrison's voice came over the ground frequency as he completed his pre-flight checks. Tower, Ghost Rider ready for taxi. Request clearance to runway 27 for departure. Ghost Rider, cleared to taxi runway 27. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. Contact departure control on a 124.7. Emma watched the F-35 begin its slow taxi toward the runway, her eyes tracking every movement with the kind of focused attention that suggested more than professional interest. When Chen glanced at her again, she caught something in Emma's expression that looked almost like longing. Not for the aircraft itself, but for something the aircraft represented. Something that had been taken away and never given back. As the F-35 disappeared behind a hangar, heading for the active runway, Chen made a decision. There were questions that needed answers, and Emma Rodriguez was carrying secrets that went deeper than anyone suspected. But those answers would have to wait, because in less than 10 minutes, Morrison would be airborne. And in less than 15 minutes, when he made radio contact with his adversary for the first time, he would hear a call sign that would make Emma's carefully constructed new life impossible to maintain. The ghost of Viper 1 was about to be called by name, and some ghosts once summoned refused to return to the shadows. Morrison's F-35 lifted off runway 27 with the graceful power that made the Lightning II one of the most feared aircraft in the world. Emma watched from the ground crew area as the sleek fighter climbed into the Virginia sky, its twin engines leaving contrails that dissipated quickly in the morning air. Around her, the normal rhythm of flight operations continued, ground crews securing equipment, maintenance teams preparing for the next sortie, tower controllers coordinating traffic. Everything was routine, everything was normal. Until Morrison's voice crackled over the training frequency, confident and casual. Departure control, Ghost Rider airborne and climbing. Request vector to training area Bravo 7. Ghost Rider, turn left heading 270. Climb and maintain flight level 240. Contact Red Crown on 251.2 for adversary coordination. Emma's hands stilled on the equipment she was stowing. Red Crown was the tactical air controller for the training exercise. In 30 seconds, Morrison would check in with them and be directed to his adversary aircraft. In 60 seconds, he would make first contact with the F-22 pilot designated as his opponent, and then she would know. Master Chief Chen approached with a clipboard, ostensibly to review the completed maintenance forms, but Emma could feel her watchful attention. Everything looked good out there, Rodriguez. Yes, Master Chief. Clean launch, no issues. But Emma's voice carried a tension that hadn't been there minutes before. Chen noticed the way Rodriguez was listening to the radio chatter with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. Most crew chiefs paid attention to their aircraft until it was safely airborne, then moved on to the next task. Emma was still focused on Morrison's radio calls, tracking his progress like someone who understood tactical aviation from the inside. Ghost Rider, Red Crown. Contact your adversary on tactical frequency 143.5. Call sign Phantom F-22 Raptor, currently at your 11 o'clock 40 miles. Morrison's acknowledgement came through clearly. Red Crown, Ghost Rider copies, switching to tactical. A pause. Then Morrison's voice, slightly different now, the casual confidence replaced by something more professional. He was talking to another pilot, another warrior, and the tone shift was subtle but unmistakable. Phantom Ghost Rider, good morning, ready for some fun? The response came through the speaker with crystal clarity, and Emma's world stopped. The voice was female, calm, precise, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of combat experience. But it wasn't the professionalism that made Emma's breath catch. It wasn't the competence that radiated through the radio waves. It was the voice itself, because Emma had heard it before. In briefing rooms, in combat, in the dark hours when everything went wrong and only the best pilots in the world could bring everyone home alive. Ghost Rider Phantom, beautiful morning for some BFM. Hope you brought your A-game today. Emma's clipboard slipped from her hands, clattering onto the tarmac with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence of her world. Chen moved quickly to steady her, concern evident on her weathered face. Rodriguez, you okay? Emma couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because the voice on the radio belonged to someone who wasn't supposed to exist anymore, someone who had been declared dead in official reports. Someone whose funeral Emma had attended 3 years ago, standing in the back wearing civilian clothes because her own military career was already over. Someone who had been her wingman, her friend, her sister in arms, Commander Lisa Phantom Hayes. The radio crackled again as Morrison and Phantom began their tactical coordination. Phantom Ghost Rider, setting up for BFM engagement. I'll take high cap, you can come from below. Negative, Ghost Rider. Let's make this interesting. How about we start neutral, co-altitude, and see what happens when the merge happens? Morrison's laugh carried over the frequency. Phantom, I appreciate the confidence, but the F-35's technological advantages make traditional dogfighting pretty one-sided. Maybe we should stick to BVR engagement profiles. Copy that, Ghost Rider, your call. But just so we're clear, when I inevitably force a merge and end up on your 6, remember that you chose the easy way first. Emma's legs gave out. She sat down hard on a nearby equipment crate, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Chen was beside her immediately, one hand on her shoulder, the other reaching for her radio to call for medical assistance. No, Emma managed, her voice barely a whisper. No, I'm fine. Just need a minute. But she wasn't fine, because Lisa Hayes had been shot down over Syria 3 years ago. Emma had heard the Mayday call herself, had listened helplessly as Phantom's F-22 took a surface-to-air missile hit during the same mission that destroyed Emma's own career. The search and rescue operation had found wreckage, but no pilot. Lisa had been declared KIA after 72 hours. Emma had carried that guilt for 3 years. The knowledge that her actions on that mission, her decision to break formation and engage ground targets against orders, had left Lisa exposed, had gotten her wingman killed. Except Lisa wasn't dead. She was alive, flying, and about to engage in air combat maneuvering against a pilot who had no idea what he was facing. Morrison's voice came through again, now with a slight edge of annoyance. Phantom, let's just run the exercise as briefed. F-35 versus F-22, BVR engagement, technological superiority demonstration. Roger that, Ghost Rider. But hypothetically, if we were to merge, and I'm not saying we will, what's your plan for close-range air combat maneuvering? Hypothetically, the F-35's helmet-mounted display and distributed aperture system give me 360-degree awareness. Traditional ACM tactics don't apply when I can literally see through the aircraft. Emma closed her eyes, remembering Lisa's voice in similar conversations years ago. Phantom had always been unimpressed by pilots who relied too heavily on technology, who forgot that air combat was still about skill, instinct, and the willingness to push aircraft and pilot beyond normal limits. Interesting perspective, Ghost Rider. Here's mine. All the sensors in the world don't matter if you don't know how to use them when someone's in your face pulling 9 Gs. Are you challenging me, Phantom? A pause, then Lisa's voice, carrying a note of something that Emma recognized immediately. It was the tone Phantom used when she was about to do something that would end up in an incident report. Not challenging, Ghost Rider, educating. There's a difference. Chen was studying Emma's face with growing concern. Rodriguez, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. Emma almost laughed at the accuracy of that statement. Instead, she forced herself to stand, to adopt the professional demeanor that had become her armor over the past 3 years. I'm fine, Master Chief. The radio chatter reminded me of something. Someone I used to know. But even as she spoke, Emma was calculating distances, flight times, tactical considerations. Morrison was overconfident, undertrained for close-range combat, and flying against one of the most skilled pilots the Navy had ever produced. Phantom had always been aggressive, always. Willing to push the envelope, always ready to prove that pilot skill could overcome technological advantages. This wasn't going to be a simple training exercise. This was going to be a lesson in humility delivered at 500 miles per hour. Ghost Rider, Phantom, coming up on merge point. You ready for this? Morrison's response carried renewed confidence. Phantom, I'm locked on. Fox 3. Simulated kill, Ghost Rider. Nice shot. But now you're defensive. What? How are you? Because while you were focused on that long-range shot, I was closing the distance. Welcome to the merge, hot shot. Try to keep up. The radio exploded with the sound of high-G maneuvering, engines screaming, pilots grunting against the forces that threatened to crush consciousness from their bodies. Morrison's earlier confidence evaporated as he found himself in exactly the kind of knife fight he'd claimed was obsolete. Jesus Christ, how are you doing that? Ghost Rider, watch your language on tactical frequency, and I'm doing it because I know my aircraft. Every bolt, every system, every limitation. Do you? Emma stood transfixed, listening to the aerial ballet playing out 30,000 feet above. She could visualize every maneuver, every tactical decision, every moment when Morrison's textbook knowledge crashed against Phantom's intuitive mastery of air combat. Phantom, this isn't possible. The F-35's flight characteristics should give me the advantage in sustained turning. Should. Interesting word, Ghost Rider. Here's another one for you. Canopy. What? Look up. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Morrison's voice, small and incredulous. How the hell are you above me? Because while you were thinking about flight characteristics, I was thinking about physics, energy management, Ghost Rider. Altitude is life, speed is life, and knowing when to trade one for the other is everything. Chen was listening now too, drawn by the intensity of the engagement and Emma's obvious personal investment in the outcome. Sounds like your boy Morrison is getting schooled. Emma nodded, unable to look away from the radio speaker. Phantom doesn't mess around. When she gets in close, it's over. The words were out before Emma could stop them. Chen's head snapped toward her, eyes sharp with sudden understanding. How do you know Phantom is female, and how do you know her tactics? Emma's mouth opened, then closed. The carefully constructed wall she'd built around her past had just developed a crack, and Chen was staring right through it. Before Emma could answer, Morrison's voice cut through the tactical frequency, strained and desperate. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Ghost Rider declaring an emergency. I've lost hydraulics. Flight controls are unresponsive. I'm going down. The routine training exercise had just become a life-or-death emergency. And 30,000 feet above Virginia, two of the Navy's most advanced fighters were now flying a mission that would determine whether Morrison lived or died. Emma looked at the radio, then at Chen, knowing that her secret was about to become impossible to maintain. Because when pilots' lives were on the line, some knowledge was too important to keep hidden, even if revealing it meant destroying the quiet life she'd built for herself and her daughter. The control tower erupted into controlled chaos. Emergency protocols activated with mechanical precision, crash crews scrambling to vehicles, medical teams racing to standby positions, tower controllers clearing airspace around the disabled F-35. But for Emma Rodriguez, standing beside her equipment cart on the flight line, the world had narrowed to a single radio frequency and the sound of her former wingman trying to save a pilot's life. Ghost Rider, Phantom, I'm coming alongside to assess your damage. Can you see your hydraulics panel? Morrison's voice came through tight with controlled panic. Phantom, I've got warning lights across the board. Primary flight controls unresponsive. I'm flying on emergency backup, but it's not going to last long. Emma closed her eyes, remembering the feel of an F-22 with failing systems, the way the aircraft fought you when multiple redundancies began cascading toward catastrophic failure. She'd been there herself, had felt the terrible helplessness of watching technology fail when you needed it most. Ghost Rider, I'm visual on your aircraft. You've got fluid streaming from your port side. Looks like you took a hydraulic line failure. Probably happened during that last high G turn. Master Chief Chen was listening intently now, her professional attention focused on the emergency unfolding overhead. But she was also watching Emma's reactions, noting the way the crew chief seemed to anticipate radio calls, the way she unconsciously mimicked the body language of someone receiving tactical information in a cockpit. Phantom, how bad is it? Can I make it back to base? Lisa's voice remained calm, professional, the tone of someone who had talked pilots through emergencies before. Ghost Rider, you're losing fluid fast. I'd estimate you have maybe 10 minutes of backup hydraulics before total system failure. We need to get you on the ground now. Roger. Declaring emergency, requesting priority handling for immediate landing. Tower control cut into the frequency with crisp efficiency. Ghost Rider, Oceana Tower, we copy your emergency. Runway 27 is being cleared for emergency landing. All traffic is being diverted. Emergency crews are standing by. But Emma was already running calculations in her head, and the numbers weren't good. Morrison was 30 miles out, flying a crippled aircraft with limited control authority. Even at best speed, it would take him at least 12 minutes to reach the field. His backup systems wouldn't last that long. He's not going to make it, Emma whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Chen turned sharply. What did you say? Emma realized she'd spoken aloud, revealing knowledge she wasn't supposed to have. The timing. Hydraulic failure in an F-35. He's got maybe 8 to 10 minutes of backup systems. 30 miles out, he'll never make the runway. How do you know the hydraulic system specifications for an F-35? Chen's voice was quiet, but her eyes were laser-focused. Before Emma could answer, Phantom's voice cut through the radio with the kind of authority that came from someone used to making life-or-death decisions under pressure. Ghost Rider, I need you to listen carefully. Your backup systems won't get you to Oceana, but there's an emergency strip 15 miles southeast of your position. Shorter runway, but it's your only option. Phantom, I've never landed at that strip. I don't know the approach. Then it's a good thing you've got a wingman. I'm going to talk you through this step by step. First, I need you to configure for emergency landing procedures, landing gear manual extension, flaps to emergency setting. Emma found herself nodding along with the instructions, her hands unconsciously moving through the motions she'd performed countless times in similar emergencies. Chen caught the movement, the automatic response of someone whose body remembered what her mind was trying to hide. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Emma looked at the Master Chief, seeing the careful assessment in her experienced eyes. Chen had put pieces together, had recognized that Emma's knowledge went far beyond what any crew chief should possess. You've flown before, haven't you? Not as a passenger, as a pilot. The question hung in the air between them. While overhead, Morrison fought to keep his aircraft stable enough for the emergency approach that Phantom was coordinating. Emma looked at Chen, then at the radio, then back at Chen. 3 years of careful silence, 3 years of protecting her daughter from the truth about why they'd left their old life behind. 3 years of accepting the assumptions and casual dismissals because maintaining her cover was more important than defending her pride. But now Morrison's life hung in the balance, and Emma could hear the strain in his voice as he tried to follow Phantom's instructions. She could hear the edge of panic creeping in as his backup systems degraded faster than expected, and she realized that some secrets weren't worth keeping when people were about to die. Yes, Emma said quietly. I've flown before. Chen nodded slowly, unsurprised but needing confirmation. What aircraft? F-22, F-35, A-10, everything they'd let me get my hands on. Emma's voice was steady now, the professional mask slipping away to reveal something harder underneath. I was a test pilot. Before. Before what? Emma gestured toward the radio, where Morrison's increasingly desperate voice mixed with Phantom's steady instructions. Before that. Chen looked puzzled for a moment. Then, understanding dawned. You know Phantom? You flew with her. She was my wingman, Syria 3 years ago, Operation Glass Falcon. Emma's voice carried the weight of memory, of decisions that had cost everything. I thought she was dead. Ghost Rider, you're coming in too fast. Reduce power, let the aircraft settle. You've got this. But Morrison's response carried the edge of panic that Emma recognized immediately. Phantom, I can't feel the controls. The stick isn't responding. I think I'm about to lose everything. Emma looked at Chen, making a decision that would change everything. I need to get on that radio. Rodriguez, Master Chief, Morrison is about to die. I can hear it in his voice, in the way he's handling the aircraft. Phantom's good. She's the best. But she's not there in the cockpit with him. I know what he's feeling right now, and I know what he needs to hear. Chen studied Emma's face, seeing something there that she'd only glimpsed before, the quiet authority of someone who had commanded respect in dangerous skies. What's your call sign, Rodriguez? Emma met her eyes steadily. Viper 1. The name hit Chen like a physical blow. Viper 1. She'd heard that call sign whispered in briefing rooms, seen it on after-action reports that came with classification stamps that meant careers could end for talking about them. Viper 1 was a ghost story, a legend about a female pilot who had flown missions that weren't supposed to exist. Jesus Christ, Chen breathed. You're her. You're the pilot who got her wingman killed and lost her wings for breaking orders. Yes, Emma's voice was flat, matter of fact. But right now, Morrison needs help, and I'm the only one here who knows what he's going through. Chen looked at the radio, then back at Emma. Do it. Emma reached for the handheld radio that Chen carried, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. For 3 years, she'd hidden behind the anonymity of crew chief coveralls and the assumptions people made about enlisted personnel. But Morrison was running out of time, and some knowledge was too important to keep secret when lives were on the line. She keyed the radio, using Chen's call sign to access the emergency frequency. Phantom ground control. I've got someone here who might be able to help. Phantom's voice came back immediately, sharp with surprise. Ground control, this is a closed tactical frequency, emergency aircraft only. Phantom, Emma said, her voice carrying across the radio waves for the first time in 3 years. It's Viper. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. When Phantom spoke again, her voice carried a mixture of shock, joy, and something that sounded suspiciously like relief. Viper 1, I thought you were dead, grounded, washing out as a crew chief? Emma's voice held a bitter humor. Long story, but right now, Ghost Rider needs both of us. Morrison's voice cut in, confused and increasingly desperate. Who the hell is Viper 1? And can someone please help me figure out why my aircraft is trying to kill me? Emma smiled grimly. It was time to remind Morrison and everyone else listening that some lessons could only be taught by those who had survived learning them the hard way. Ghost Rider, Viper 1. I'm on the ground, but I've been where you are. Hydraulic failure in a high-performance aircraft with backup systems cascading toward total failure. The key is not to fight the aircraft. Work with what you have left. Viper 1, who are you? Emma looked at Chen, who nodded encouragingly. Around them, other ground crew members had stopped what they were doing, drawn by the intensity of the emergency communications and the unfamiliar call sign that carried unmistakable authority. Ghost Rider, I'm the pilot who's going to help you get home alive. Now, listen carefully, because Phantom and I are going to walk you through something that's going to save your life. 30,000 feet above, Morrison was about to learn that the quiet crew chief who loaded his missiles knew more about flying fighters than he'd ever imagined. And on the ground, Emma Rodriguez was about to discover that some identities were impossible to hide once the truth demanded to be heard. The emergency frequency crackled with tension as Morrison fought to maintain control of his rapidly deteriorating F-35. Emma stood beside Chen, handheld radio in her grip, feeling the weight of 3 years' carefully constructed anonymity falling away word by word. Ghost Rider, Viper 1. First thing, stop fighting the stick. Your backup systems are designed to maintain basic flight control, but you're overriding them by trying to force normal responses. Morrison's voice came back strained, but slightly steadier. Viper 1, who is this? Ground control. I need to know who I'm taking instructions from. Before Chen could respond, Phantom's voice cut through the frequency with unmistakable authority. Ghost Rider, you're taking instructions from the best pilot I ever flew with. I suggest you listen. Emma felt her chest tighten. 3 years ago, Lisa Hayes had been the only person who'd stood by her when everything fell apart. The only one who'd argued that Emma's decision to break formation had been tactically sound, even if it violated direct orders. The only one who'd understood that sometimes saving lives meant accepting the consequences of insubordination. Viper 1, Phantom continued, her voice carrying across the radio waves like a bridge across 3 years of separation. It's good to hear your voice again. Ghost Rider, you're in exceptional hands. Around the flight line, other personnel were beginning to take notice. Senior Chief Martinez approached with several aviation mechanics drawn by the emergency and the unfamiliar call sign. Aircraft maintenance officers appeared from the hangar, tablets and clipboards forgotten as they listened to the unfolding drama. Viper 1, Ghost Rider. Okay, I'm listening. What do I need to do? Emma closed her eyes, remembering the feel of an aircraft on the edge of catastrophic failure, the way systems degraded in cascade patterns that could trap even experienced pilots in fatal spirals. First, I need you to reduce power to 60%. Your engines are the only systems you can still trust completely. Reducing power to 60%. Good. Now, Phantom's going to guide you toward the emergency strip, but I need you to understand something about landing a fighter with failed hydraulics. Your approach is going to be different from anything you've trained for. Chen watched Emma's face, seeing the transformation from quiet crew chief to command pilot happening in real time. The woman beside her spoke with the confidence of someone who had faced death in high-performance aircraft and lived to teach others how to survive similar encounters. Senior Chief Martinez moved closer, his expression showing confusion and growing recognition. Wait a minute. Did she just say Viper 1? Chen nodded grimly. Yeah, she did. But Viper 1 was... Martinez's voice trailed off as understanding dawned. Holy shit, that's impossible. Ghost Rider, you're approaching the emergency strip now. I need you to configure for emergency landing. Flaps to full, landing gear down. And here's the critical part. Do not use normal approach speeds. What do you mean? Emma's voice carried the authority of hard-earned experience. With degraded flight controls, you need extra airspeed to maintain authority. Come in 20 knots faster than normal. I know it sounds wrong, but trust me. Morrison's voice carried doubt. Viper 1, that goes against everything I was taught about emergency procedures. Before Emma could respond, Phantom's voice came through with quiet intensity. Ghost Rider, Viper 1 talked me through a similar landing 3 years ago when my F-22 took a missile hit over Syria. I'm alive because I listened to her. I suggest you do the same. A ripple of recognition passed through the gathered ground crew. The Syria missions were legend, whispered stories about classified operations that had pushed pilot and aircraft capabilities beyond normal limits. Anyone who had survived those missions carried credibility that couldn't be questioned. Phantom, you were shot down over Syria. The report said a lot of things, Phantom interrupted. Most of them were wrong. But that's a conversation for later. Right now you need to focus on getting on the ground alive. Emma keyed the radio again, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. Ghost Rider, you're 1 mile from touchdown. I need you to trust your instincts now. Your backup systems are going to feel sluggish, but they'll respond if you're patient with them. Viper 1, I can see the runway. This is really happening. Yes, it is. You're going to make it. Around Emma, the crowd of listeners had grown. Officers were arriving from the administrative buildings, drawn by radio chatter about emergency landings and call signs that belonged in classified briefings. Commander Sarah Wilson, the base operations officer, approached with several junior officers, her expression shifting from professional concern to sharp attention as she heard the ongoing radio conversation. Ghost Riders on final approach, came the call from the emergency strip tower. Aircraft appears stable, emergency crews standing by. Emma found herself holding her breath as Morrison guided his crippled F-35 toward the short runway. She could visualize every moment of the approach, could feel the way the aircraft would want to settle too quickly with degraded flight controls, could imagine the precise inputs required to maintain the delicate balance between controlled flight and catastrophic loss of control. "Touchdown in 10 seconds, Morrison called. 5, 4, 3, touchdown. A collective exhale passed through the gathered personnel as Morrison's F-35 made contact with the runway, rolled long but straight, and finally came to a stop near the far end of the emergency strip. Fire crews were moving immediately, surrounding the aircraft with foam and safety equipment. "Ghost Rider on deck, safe landing, pilot uninjured," came the report from emergency crews. The crowd around Emma began to disperse, personnel returning to their duties with the satisfied air of people who had witnessed competence under pressure. But Commander Wilson remained, her attention focused entirely on the woman holding the radio. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Wilson said quietly, "I think we need to talk." Emma looked at the commander, seeing in her eyes the kind of assessment that meant careers were about to be scrutinized. She handed the radio back to Chen, straightening to attention despite still wearing her crew chief coveralls. "Yes, ma'am." Wilson studied Emma's face carefully. "Viper 1 is a call sign I've seen in classified briefings, very classified briefings. The pilot who carried that designation was reported as discharged from service 3 years ago following an incident over Syria." Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, ma'am." That pilot was also reported as one of the most skilled fighter jocks the Navy had produced in the last decade, someone who flew missions that are still classified above my clearance level. The conversation was interrupted by Phantom's voice over the radio as she prepared to land her own aircraft. "Tower. Phantom requesting clearance to land Oceana. I'd like to debrief this incident in person." "Phantom. Cleared to land runway 27. Welcome back." Wilson looked at Emma with growing certainty. "Phantom just said she wanted to debrief in person. That suggests she knows exactly who was talking her through that emergency coordination." Emma met the commander's gaze steadily. "I imagine she does, ma'am." "Sergeant Rodriguez," Wilson said carefully, "are you telling me that the crew chief who's been loading ordnance on my flight line for the past year is actually a former Navy fighter pilot with a security clearance that probably exceeds my own?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emma looked around at the faces watching her, Chen with professional curiosity, Martinez with growing recognition, junior officers with the wide-eyed attention of people witnessing something that would become base legend. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of accepting dismissal and condescension, 3 years of building a quiet life for herself and her daughter based on the assumption that her past would stay buried. But Morrison was alive because she had spoken up. The truth had demanded to be heard, and now there was no putting it back in the box. "Yes, ma'am," Emma said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Wilson nodded slowly, her expression shifting from suspicion to something approaching respect. "Well, Sergeant Rodriguez, or should I say Viper 1, I think it's time we had a conversation about why one of the Navy's most decorated fighter pilots is working as a crew chief on my base." In the distance, Phantom's F-22 was touching down on runway 27, taxiing toward the flight line where her former wingman waited in coveralls and work boots. The ghost of Viper 1 had been called by name, and now the entire base was about to learn that some legends didn't die. They just waited for the right moment to prove they had never really been gone. Emma Rodriguez was about to discover that the truth, once revealed, had a momentum all its own. And whether she was ready for it or not, her carefully constructed new life was about to collide head-on with the warrior she had tried so hard to leave behind. The F-22 Raptor taxied toward the flight line with the predatory grace that made it the most feared air superiority fighter in the world. Emma watched from beside the maintenance hangar, still wearing her crew chief coveralls, still carrying the radio that had just connected her to a past she'd thought was buried forever. Around her, the normal rhythm of base operations had paused, not stopped, but shifted into the kind of watchful attention that preceded significant moments. Commander Wilson stood nearby, her expression thoughtful and calculating. Senior Chief Martinez positioned himself where he could observe without intruding. Master Chief Chen remained close to Emma's shoulder, a silent statement of support that carried weight in the complex hierarchy of military loyalty. The F-22's canopy began to rise as the aircraft reached its parking position. Ground crews approached with practiced efficiency, but Emma could see the way they moved, slightly slower than normal, with the careful attention of people who understood they were about to witness something important. Lisa Phantom Hayes climbed down from the cockpit with the fluid movements of someone who had performed this routine thousands of times. Even from a distance, Emma could see that 3 years had changed her former wingman. Lisa was leaner now, her face carrying lines that spoke to experiences beyond normal operational flying, but her posture remained unmistakably that of a pilot who commanded respect through competence rather than rank. Lisa completed her post-flight inspection with methodical thoroughness, speaking briefly with the ground crew chief, securing her personal equipment. But Emma could feel her attention like a radar lock, could sense the moment when Lisa's eyes found her across the tarmac. For a long moment, neither woman moved. 3 years of separation, 3 years of believing the other was lost, 3 years of carrying guilt and grief that had reshaped both their lives. Then, Lisa began walking across the flight line, her stride purposeful and steady. Emma felt her breathing change, her heart rate increase. She had imagined this reunion countless times over the past 3 years, had dreamed of finding out that Lisa was alive, had constructed elaborate fantasies about explanations and reconciliation. But she had never imagined it happening like this. With herself in coveralls and Lisa in a flight suit, surrounded by an audience of curious personnel who were beginning to understand they were witnessing something significant. Lisa stopped 3 feet away, close enough for private conversation, but far enough to maintain military propriety. Her eyes swept over Emma's appearance, the crew chief uniform, the work-worn hands, the careful way Emma held herself like someone who had learned to hide her true nature. "Viper," Lisa said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of relief, joy, and something that sounded suspiciously like reproach. "You've been harder to find than a stealth fighter with its transponder off." Emma managed a small smile despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "Phantom, good to see you're still breathing. The reports of your death were apparently greatly exaggerated." "Yeah, well, the reports of a lot of things from that mission were greatly exaggerated." Lisa's voice carried an edge that spoke to unfinished business, to truths that had been buried, along with official versions of events that bore little resemblance to reality. Commander Wilson approached with the careful steps of someone entering a conversation that carried implications beyond the obvious. "Commander Hayes, I'm Wilson, Base Operations. That was exceptional flying today. The emergency coordination, the tactical assistance." Lisa's attention shifted to Wilson, and Emma could see her former wingman's professional mask sliding into place. "Thank you, ma'am. Emergency situations require all available resources, including ground personnel with unusual expertise," Wilson said pointedly, glancing toward Emma. "I'm beginning to understand that Sergeant Rodriguez brings capabilities to our maintenance operations that exceed normal parameters." Lisa looked at Emma again, her expression unreadable. Viper 1 always brought exceptional capabilities to any operation. The fact that the Navy failed to recognize and properly utilize those capabilities represents one of the most significant personnel management failures in recent memory. The words carried the weight of official criticism delivered in professional language. Around them, junior personnel were beginning to pay attention, not obviously, not in ways that violated protocol, but with the heightened awareness that accompanied significant moments in military culture. Emma felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since her discharge 3 years ago. "Phantom, maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." "Actually," Lisa said, her voice carrying a note of decision that Emma recognized immediately, "I think this conversation needs to happen exactly where it is." Before Emma could object, Lisa came to attention and rendered a salute, not the casual acknowledgement between officers of equal rank, but the deliberate, precise salute of recognition and respect. Her voice carried across the flight line with unmistakable authority. "Viper 1, it is an honor to serve with you again." Emma froze, her hand halfway toward returning the salute, before remembering that she was no longer an officer, no longer entitled to the courtesies that Lisa was offering. But Lisa's salute remained steady, held with the kind of duration that made it impossible to ignore or dismiss as casual military courtesy. "Phantom," Emma said quietly. "I can't—" "Yes, you can," Lisa interrupted firmly. "You saved Morrison's life today. You coordinated an emergency landing from the ground with the same competence you showed in combat. You did what you've always done. You stepped up when lives were on the line, regardless of personal cost." Emma looked around, seeing faces turn toward them with growing attention. Chen nodded encouragingly. Martinez straightened slightly, his expression showing dawning recognition. Several junior officers had paused their activities, sensing something significant in the exchange. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Emma returned the salute. The moment her hand reached the proper position, something shifted in the atmosphere around them. It was subtle at first, Chen coming to attention, Martinez following suit. Then one of the aircraft mechanics stopped what he was doing and saluted as well, his movements carrying the automatic respect that military personnel showed to demonstrated competence under pressure. Wilson studied the developing scene with sharp professional interest. "Commander Hayes, would I be correct in assuming that Sergeant Rodriguez, Viper 1, played a significant role in your survival during the Syria operations?" Lisa's salute remained steady, her voice carrying across the growing circle of attention. "Ma'am, Viper 1 saved my life on multiple occasions during classified operations. Her tactical brilliance, flight skills, and leadership under pressure represent the highest standards of naval aviation." More personnel were beginning to take notice. A group of pilots emerged from the briefing room, drawn by the unusual sight of an F-22 pilot holding an extended salute. When they recognized Lisa's call sign from the morning's radio chatter, their casual curiosity transformed into professional respect. One of them, a lieutenant commander Emma didn't recognize, approached and snapped to attention. "Ma'am, are we witnessing something significant?" Lisa's voice carried clearly across the expanding circle. "You're witnessing the recognition of exceptional service that should have been acknowledged 3 years ago. Viper 1's contributions to naval aviation and national security have been classified beyond most clearance levels, but her competence speaks for itself." Emma felt her composure wavering. The attention was overwhelming, the public nature of Lisa's recognition both gratifying and terrifying. She had built her new life on anonymity, on the assumption that her past would remain hidden. This public acknowledgement threatened everything she had constructed for herself and her daughter. "Phantom," she said quietly, "this isn't necessary." "Yes, it is," Lisa replied firmly. "For 3 years, I've watched the Navy struggle with pilot retention, with maintaining the kind of expertise that wins wars. Meanwhile, one of our most skilled aviators has been loading ordnance because bureaucratic incompetence and political cowardice prevented proper recognition of her service." The circle of observers had grown to include virtually every person on the immediate flight line. Ground crews, pilots, maintenance officers, administrative personnel, all drawn by the unusual sight of an extended formal recognition between two pilots, whose call signs were beginning to resonate with whispered recognition. Commander Wilson made a decision that would reshape everything that followed. She came to attention and added her salute to Lisa's, her voice carrying the authority of base operations. "F. You're hooked on this story. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Sergeant Rodriguez, your actions today demonstrated exceptional competence and saved a pilot's life. Your service record, whatever its complications, clearly merits recognition." The effect was immediate and profound. As the base operations commander saluted, protocol demanded that others follow suit. One by one, every military person in sight came to attention and rendered the courtesy that military culture reserved for demonstrated excellence. Emma stood surrounded by saluting personnel wearing crew chief coveralls, her work-worn hands trembling slightly as she maintained her return salute. The moment stretched beyond normal protocol, becoming something deeper, acknowledgement not just of her actions today, but of service that had been unrecognized for 3 years. When Lisa finally lowered her hand, the others followed. but the atmosphere remained charged with significance. Emma looked around at faces that showed respect rather than the casual dismissal she had grown accustomed to as a crew chief. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying farther than intended in the sudden silence. Lisa smiled, the first genuine expression of joy Emma had seen from her in 3 years. "Welcome back, Viper. We've missed you." But even as Emma felt the warmth of recognition and reunion, she was calculating the implications of what had just happened. Word would spread. Questions would be asked. Her carefully constructed anonymity was gone, and with it, the quiet life she had built for herself and her daughter. The ghost of Viper 1 had been called by name, saluted by her peers, and acknowledged by authority. There was no going back now. If you're hooked on this story of redemption and courage, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Lieutenant Commander Jake "Hotshot" Morrison arrived back at Oceana Naval Air Station 45 minutes after his emergency landing, transported by helicopter from the emergency strip, where his F-35 sat surrounded by maintenance crews and accident investigators. He climbed down from the rescue bird with the careful movements of someone whose confidence had been thoroughly shaken, his flight suit wrinkled, his earlier swagger replaced by the subdued demeanor of a pilot who had just experienced his own mortality. Morrison had spent the helicopter ride replaying the emergency in his mind, the sudden loss of hydraulics, the terrifying moment when his controls stopped responding, the voice on the radio that had guided him through an approach he'd never trained for. He'd been saved by exceptional piloting from Phantom and tactical coordination from someone called Viper 1, a call sign he'd never heard but which had commanded immediate respect from every controller and pilot on the emergency frequency. As the helicopter settled onto the landing pad, Morrison could see unusual activity around the flight line. Personnel were clustered in groups, conversations animated, the kind of energy that accompanied significant events. He assumed it was related to his emergency. Accident investigations always drew attention, and emergency landings became base gossip within hours. What he didn't expect was the way conversations stopped as he walked toward the administrative building. The way personnel looked at him with expressions that mixed relief at his survival with something that looked suspiciously like reassessment. The way Senior Chief Martinez nodded respectfully, but without the automatic deference that Morrison had come to expect from enlisted personnel. Morrison made it halfway across the tarmac before he saw her. Emma Rodriguez stood beside a maintenance hangar, still wearing her crew chief coveralls, still carrying the work-worn appearance of someone who spent her days loading ordnance and checking aircraft systems. But she was surrounded by a group that included Commander Wilson, Master Chief Chen, and several pilots Morrison recognized from the squadron. More importantly, she was engaged in what looked like a professional briefing rather than the casual conversation that typically characterized interactions between officers and enlisted personnel. Morrison approached the group, expecting the automatic acknowledgement that his rank typically commanded. Instead, he found himself on the periphery of a discussion that was clearly above his clearance level. Classified operations require operational security that extends beyond mission completion, Emma was saying, her voice carrying an authority Morrison had never heard from her before. The Syria missions demonstrated that tactical innovation often conflicts with established doctrine. Commander Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Which explains why certain after-action reports were classified beyond normal parameters. Morrison cleared his throat, expecting attention to shift to him. When it didn't happen immediately, he spoke up with the kind of casual authority he was used to commanding. "Excuse me, but I'd like to thank whoever provided assistance during my emergency today. I understand there was ground coordination that helped with the approach." The group turned toward him, and Morrison felt the first flicker of unease. The expressions he saw weren't the mix of concern and professional interest he'd expected. Instead, there was something that looked like evaluation, as if he were being measured against standards he didn't understand. Emma stepped forward, her posture professional but not deferential. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, I'm glad you made it back safely. Emergency landings with degraded flight controls are never routine." Morrison nodded, still expecting the group to organize itself around his presence and experience. Yes, well, good flying and proper training. I understand someone on the ground provided tactical support? That would be me, Emma said quietly. Morrison blinked, processing the statement. You, but you're... He caught himself before saying, just a crew chief. But the implication hung in the air like an accusation. Sergeant Rodriguez, Commander Wilson interjected smoothly, was instrumental in coordinating your emergency approach. Her expertise in high-performance aircraft systems proved invaluable. Morrison looked at Emma with growing confusion. The quiet woman who loaded his missiles, who accepted his casual condescension without protest, had somehow provided tactical support during his emergency. The cognitive dissonance was jarring. I don't understand, Morrison said slowly. Rodriguez, you're ground crew. How could you provide tactical support for a fighter aircraft emergency? Before Emma could respond, a new voice cut across the conversation with unmistakable authority. Because Viper 1 has more flight hours in high-performance aircraft than you'll accumulate in your entire career. Morrison turned to see Commander Lisa Hayes approaching, her F-22 flight suit marking her as the pilot who had talked him through the emergency approach. Phantom, the pilot whose skill had kept him alive when his aircraft tried to kill him. Commander Hayes, Morrison said, straightening slightly, thank you for the assistance today. Your flying was exceptional. Lisa nodded acknowledgement but didn't return the automatic courtesy that Morrison expected. You're welcome, but you should direct your primary thanks to Viper 1. Her coordination from the ground was the difference between a successful emergency landing and a smoking crater. Morrison looked between Lisa and Emma, his confusion deepening. Viper 1? I don't understand the reference. The silence that followed was heavy with significance. Morrison could see expressions being exchanged, could sense that he was missing critical information. When Lisa spoke again, her voice carried the kind of authority that came from combat experience. Lieutenant Commander, meet Commander Emma Rodriguez, call sign Viper 1, former F-22 pilot, former test pilot, and one of the most skilled aviators the Navy has ever produced. Morrison's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Emma, really looked, seeing for the first time the bearing that spoke to command experience, the calm competence that he had mistaken for docility, the quiet confidence that came from someone who had nothing left to prove. That's impossible, Morrison said weakly. She's a crew chief. She loads ordnance. She loads ordnance, Lisa confirmed, because bureaucratic incompetence and political cowardice cost the Navy one of its most valuable pilots. But her expertise doesn't disappear just because someone decided she was expendable. Morrison felt the ground shifting beneath his assumptions. Every interaction he'd had with Emma Rodriguez over the past months suddenly took on different meaning. The casual dismissals, the condescending comments, the automatic assumption that she knew nothing about flying, all of it replayed in his memory with nauseating clarity. Commander, I had no idea, Morrison stammered. Emma's expression remained neutral, professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she remembered every slight, every assumption, every moment when his rank had shielded him from considering her as anything more than a convenient target for casual superiority. No, Emma said quietly. You didn't. Morrison looked around the group, seeing for the first time the way personnel were positioned, not around him as the ranking officer, but around Emma as the acknowledged expert. He realized with growing horror that he had just spent months treating one of the Navy's most decorated pilots like a servant. This morning, Morrison said, his voice small, when I was talking about dogfighting being obsolete, about technology replacing pilot skill, you were talking to someone who has more air-to-air kills than most squadron commanders, Lisa interrupted smoothly. Someone who has flown combat missions that are still classified above your security clearance. Someone who has forgotten more about tactical aviation than you've learned in your entire career. Morrison's face flushed red as the magnitude of his error became clear. Not just the casual disrespect, but the professional arrogance, the assumption that his recent success in test pilot training somehow qualified him to make pronouncements about air combat to someone who had actually fought and won aerial engagements. Commander Rodriguez, Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper, I owe you an apology. I had no right to— To what? Emma asked, her voice remaining steady. To assume that my current assignment reflected my capabilities? To treat me like furniture because my uniform didn't carry enough rank to demand your respect? Morrison flinched as if he'd been slapped. Yes, all of that. Emma studied his face for a long moment, seeing genuine remorse mixed with embarrassment and fear. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, no triumph, just the weary authority of someone who had endured more significant challenges than wounded pride. Lieutenant Commander, you made assumptions based on incomplete information. That's a luxury that combat pilots can't afford. Today, when your life was on the line, those assumptions didn't matter. Only competence mattered. Morrison nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. You saved my life. I did my job, Emma corrected, the same job I do every day, taking care of aircraft and the people who fly them. The only difference is that today, you were willing to listen to advice from someone in coveralls. The words carried no malice, but they cut deeper than anger would have. Morrison realized that Emma's quiet competence had been visible all along, in the precision of her maintenance work, in her knowledge of aircraft systems, in the way she moved around fighters with unconscious familiarity. He had chosen not to see it because acknowledging it would have required adjusting his assumptions about rank, gender, and the natural order of military aviation. What can I do? Morrison asked quietly. How can I make this right? Emma looked at him thoughtfully, then at the group of personnel who had witnessed the entire exchange. You can remember this moment the next time you're tempted to judge someone's capabilities based on their current assignment rather than their demonstrated competence. Morrison nodded, understanding that he was being offered a lesson rather than punishment. Yes, ma'am, I will. The formality of addressing Emma as ma'am while she wore enlisted coveralls was jarring, but it felt right in a way that Morrison couldn't quite explain. He was acknowledging not her current rank, but her earned authority. Commander Wilson stepped forward, her expression showing approval for Morrison's response. Lieutenant Commander, I think this experience offers valuable lessons about leadership, respect, and the danger of assumptions in military operations. Morrison straightened, recognizing the official nature of Wilson's observation. Yes, ma'am. Lessons I won't forget. As the group began to disperse, Morrison found himself alone with Emma for a moment. She was gathering her equipment, preparing to return to the ordinary duties that had hidden extraordinary capabilities for 3 years. Commander Rodriguez, Morrison said quietly, I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know. What you did today, the way you handled the emergency, it was the most professional assistance I've ever received. I'm alive because of your expertise. Emma paused in her equipment gathering, looking at Morrison with an expression that suggested she was evaluating his sincerity. Lieutenant Commander, respect isn't something you give because someone saves your life. Respect is something you give because they're human beings doing their best in difficult circumstances. Morrison felt the weight of that statement settle over him like a burden he would carry for the rest of his career. Yes, ma'am, I understand. As Emma walked away toward the maintenance hangar, Morrison stood alone on the tarmac, watching the quiet figure in coveralls who had just taught him the most important lesson of his military career. The lesson that competence wore many uniforms, and that assumptions could be more dangerous than enemy fire. The sun was setting over Oceana Naval Air Station 3 days later, when Emma Rodriguez finally made her way home. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of debriefings, interviews, and meetings that had turned her carefully ordered life upside down. Her coveralls had been replaced by a service dress uniform that felt foreign after 3 years of hiding behind enlisted stripes and maintenance schedules. The small house she shared with her daughter sat quietly in base housing, looking exactly the same as when she'd left for work 3 days ago. But everything had changed, and Emma wasn't sure how to explain that to an 8-year-old who had grown up believing her mother fixed airplanes for a living. Mom! The voice came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of running feet. Sophie Rodriguez burst around the corner with the boundless energy of a child who had been waiting impatiently for her mother's return. 8 years old, with Emma's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, Sophie had inherited enough of both parents' determination to worry her teachers and delight her mother. "There's my girl," Emma said, catching Sophie in the kind of hug that made everything else fade into background noise. For 3 years, this moment, coming home to her daughter, had been the anchor that kept Emma grounded when the weight of her hidden past threatened to pull her under. "Mom, Mrs. Patterson says people have been calling about you. She says you're famous now. Are you famous?" Emma looked over Sophie's head toward the kitchen, where Mrs. Patterson, their neighbor and Sophie's after-school babysitter, stood with the expression of someone who had spent 3 days fielding phone calls and managing curious visitors. "Famous might be a strong word," Mrs. Patterson said carefully, "but there's been considerable interest in your mother's recent activities." Emma set Sophie down gently, her mind already calculating how to navigate this conversation. For 3 years, she told her daughter that she worked on airplanes, which was technically true. She'd never mentioned that she used to fly them, that she'd once been one of the Navy's most skilled fighter pilots, that her call sign was whispered with respect in briefing rooms around the world. "Sophie, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important, about my job and about some things that happened before you were old enough to remember." Sophie's expression shifted to the kind of serious attention that children reserved for moments they sensed would change things. "Are you in trouble?" "No, baby, I'm not in trouble. But some people have learned things about me that I hadn't told them before, things about my job, about what I used to do in the Navy." Emma led Sophie to the living room, where they sat together on the couch that had been the site of countless homework sessions, bedtime stories, and quiet conversations about everything from school troubles to missing the father Sophie barely remembered. "You know how I work with airplanes, right? How I help take care of them and make sure they're safe to fly?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "You're the best airplane fixer on the base. You told me so." Emma smiled despite the complexity of what she was trying to explain. "Well, before you were born, I didn't just work on airplanes. I flew them. Really fast, really complicated airplanes called fighter jets." Sophie's eyes widened. "Like the ones that are really loud and go super fast?" "Exactly like those. I was a pilot, Sophie. I flew combat missions and I was very good at it. Some people called me one of the best." "So why did you stop? Why did you start fixing them instead of flying them?" The question that Emma had dreaded for 3 years, delivered with the straightforward curiosity that made children both wonderful and terrifying conversationalists. "Because sometimes, when you're a pilot, you have to make very difficult decisions. You have to choose between following orders and doing what you think is right. I made a choice to save people's lives, but it was different from what my commanders wanted me to do." Sophie frowned, processing this information with the kind of moral clarity that adults often envied. "But saving people is always right." "Yes, sweetheart, it is. But sometimes the people in charge don't see it that way. So they told me I couldn't be a pilot anymore, and I came here to work on airplanes instead." "That's stupid," Sophie declared with 8-year-old certainty. "If you saved people, you should get a medal, not get in trouble." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Well, funny you should mention that." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box that had been presented to her earlier that day during a ceremony in Admiral Richardson's office. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest military decoration, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Sophie stared at the medal with wide eyes. "Is that real?" "It's real. They gave it to me today for the missions I flew 3 years ago. Missions where I helped save people's lives." "So you were right? About saving people?" Emma nodded, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with military honors and everything to do with her daughter's unwavering moral compass. "Yes, baby, I was right." Sophie reached out to touch the medal gently, her small fingers tracing the bronze star and ribbon. "Mom, are you going to fly airplanes again?" The question Emma had been avoiding since Commander Wilson's offer 2 days ago. The offer to return to active flight status, to reclaim her place among the Navy's elite pilots, to step back into the cockpit where she belonged. "I don't know, Sophie. Flying airplanes again would mean big changes for us. It would mean moving, probably multiple times. It would mean me being gone sometimes for training and missions. It would mean a very different life from the quiet one we've built here." Sophie considered this with the seriousness that the decision deserved. Would you be happy flying airplanes again? Emma looked at her daughter, seeing in her young face the kind of wisdom that came from growing up as a military child, from learning early that life was about adaptation and resilience. Yes, sweetheart. I think I would be very happy flying again. Then you should do it, Sophie said with the certainty that made 8-year-olds both maddening and magnificent. We can move. I can make new friends. But you should do what makes you happy. Emma pulled Sophie into another hug, marveling at the daughter who had somehow learned to be braver than her mother. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. Mrs. Patterson answered from the kitchen, her voice carrying the patient tone she'd perfected over 3 days of managing media calls and official inquiries. Mrs. Rodriguez, it's Commander Wilson. She says it's important. Emma took the phone, listening as Wilson explained that 60 Minutes wanted to interview her, that the Navy Times was preparing a feature story, that her reinstatement had become a symbol of something larger. The military's struggle with bureaucracy, the cost of political correctness, the value of individual courage over institutional conformity. Commander Rodriguez, Wilson said, I want you to understand that this attention isn't going to fade quickly. Your story has captured public imagination. The Navy is treating this as an opportunity to demonstrate its commitment to recognizing exceptional service, regardless of past complications. Emma looked at Sophie, who was examining the Navy Cross with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for complex math problems. Commander Wilson, what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to consider accepting the promotion to full commander, the return to active flight status, and assignment to a position where your skills can be properly utilized. Test pilot school, advanced tactical development, possibly a squadron command position. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of possibility and responsibility. And if I decline? Then you remain Sergeant Rodriguez, crew chief, for as long as you want. No pressure, no consequences. But Emma, and I hope you don't mind the informality, the Navy needs pilots like you. More importantly, the country needs people who understand that sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following orders. After Emma hung up, she sat with Sophie on the couch as darkness settled over the base. Through their window, she could see F-18s conducting night training operations, their navigation lights tracing patterns against the stars. Mom, Sophie said quietly, what's a wingman? Emma looked down at her daughter, surprised by the question. A wingman is someone who flies with you, who watches your back, who's always there when you need them. Why do you ask? Sophie pointed toward the window, where 2 F-18s were flying in perfect formation. Mrs. Patterson said that lady who helped you the other day was your wingman, Commander Hayes. Lisa. Commander Hayes was my wingman, yes. We flew together for 2 years before everything changed. Is she why you saved that pilot? Because she was there too? Emma considered the question, thinking about the radio conversation that had reconnected her with Lisa, about the way her former wingman had immediately trusted her judgment, about the seamless coordination that had saved Morrison's life. Partly, yes. When you have a good wingman, you become better than you could be alone. You take care of each other. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. I think I'd like to have a wingman someday. You will, sweetheart. But remember, being someone's wingman is just as important as having one. It's about taking care of people, about being there when they need you. 2 hours later, after Sophie had gone to bed clutching the Navy crossbox like a treasure, Emma stood in her kitchen making coffee and trying to process the magnitude of the decision she faced. The life she'd built here was safe, predictable, comfortable. Sophie was settled in school, had friends, knew the rhythm of their quiet existence, but Emma could feel something stirring inside her, something that had been dormant for 3 years but was far from dead. The need to fly, to push aircraft and pilot to their limits, to be part of something larger than maintenance schedules and equipment inventories. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Emma opened it to find Lisa Hayes standing on her front step, out of uniform, carrying a bottle of wine, and wearing the kind of smile that suggested this was a personal visit rather than an official one. Phantom, what are you doing here? Wingman duty, Lisa said simply. Figured you might need someone to talk through a big decision with. They sat on Emma's back porch, watching night flight operations continue in the distance, sharing the bottle of wine and 3 years' worth of catching up. Lisa explained her survival, the successful ejection, the 3 days evading enemy forces, the extraction by special operations forces that had led to a long period of classified debriefings and reassignment. They couldn't officially acknowledge that I was alive without compromising ongoing operations, Lisa explained. So I became a ghost pilot, flying classified missions, testing experimental aircraft, doing the kind of work that doesn't appear in normal personnel records. For 3 years? For 3 years, until yesterday when hearing your voice on that radio made me realize that some secrets aren't worth keeping if they prevent you from taking care of the people who matter. Emma leaned back in her chair, feeling the Virginia night air carry the scent of jet fuel and possibility. Lisa, I don't know if I can do it again. The flying, yes, but the politics, the bureaucracy, the constant evaluation. I'm not sure I have the energy for that battle anymore. Lisa was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the kind of conviction that came from hard-won experience. Emma, 3 days ago you were loading ordnance and letting people like Morrison treat you like furniture. Today you're wearing a Navy Cross and being offered squadron command. That's not politics, that's justice. It's also public attention, media interest, constant scrutiny. Sophie's just starting to understand who her mother really is. Do I have the right to drag her into that? You have the right to show her what it looks like when someone fights for what they believe in and wins, Lisa replied firmly. Sophie's 8 years old, watching her mother choose between safety and purpose. What do you want her to learn from that choice? Emma sipped her wine, thinking about her daughter's certainty that saving people was always right, about her immediate acceptance that happiness was worth pursuing even if it required change and risk. She told me I should fly again because it would make me happy. Smart kid, takes after her mother. They sat in comfortable silence, watching aircraft return from training missions, their landing lights cutting through the darkness like falling stars. Emma thought about the past 3 years, the quiet satisfaction of maintenance work, the safety of anonymity, the simple pleasure of coming home to Sophie every night without the weight of classified missions and life-or-death decisions. But she also thought about the moment in Morrison's cockpit when hydraulics failed, about the feeling of coordinating an emergency approach from the ground, about the way her hands had remembered flight control inputs despite 3 years away from the stick. I miss it, Emma said quietly. I miss the flying, the tactical challenges, the feeling that what I do matters on a larger scale. Then come back, Lisa said simply. The Navy's offering you a chance to correct a mistake that never should have happened. Your country is offering you a chance to serve at the level your skills deserve. Your daughter is offering you permission to pursue happiness. Emma thought about Sophie's words. You should do what makes you happy. 8-year-old wisdom delivered with the kind of moral clarity that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. If I do this, if I accept the reinstatement, things are going to be complicated. Media attention, public scrutiny, constant evaluation of whether this was the right decision. Lisa smiled. Emma, 3 years ago you chose to save 4 hostages instead of following orders. You've never made decisions based on what was easy, only on what was right. The next morning, Emma walked into Commander Wilson's office wearing her service dress uniform, with Sophie beside her in her best school clothes. The little girl had insisted on coming, had argued that important decisions should include the people they affected most. Wilson looked up from her paperwork, her expression showing both professional respect and personal warmth. Commander Rodriguez, Sophie, thank you for coming in. Emma noticed the use of her restored rank, the immediate acknowledgement of her returned status. It felt strange after 3 years of being Sergeant Rodriguez, crew chief, but also somehow right, like putting on clothes that fit properly after years of wearing the wrong size. Commander Wilson, I've made my decision about the reinstatement offer. Wilson nodded, her expression carefully neutral. I'm listening. Emma looked down at Sophie, who squeezed her mother's hand encouragingly. I accept. All of it. The rank restoration, the return to flight status, the reassignment to a position where I can actually use my training and experience. Wilson smiled, the first genuine display of emotion Emma had seen from the normally composed commander. "I'm glad. The Navy is better when its best people are serving in positions that match their capabilities." "There are conditions," Emma continued. "Sophie's education and stability are my first priority. I want assignments that minimize family disruption when possible. And I want to maintain operational security. No unnecessary media attention, no publicity campaigns. I'm accepting this to serve, not to be a symbol." "Agreed. Your first assignment will be to the Navy Test Pilot School at Patuxent River. Close enough to maintain continuity for Sophie, challenging enough to utilize your skills fully. After that, we'll see where your talents are most needed." Emma felt something settle into place inside her chest, like puzzle pieces finally finding their proper configuration. "When do I start?" "Your first flight is scheduled for next Monday. F-35C carrier variant evaluation. Think you can handle getting back in a cockpit after 3 years?" Emma smiled, feeling muscles she'd forgotten she had beginning to stretch after long dormancy. "Commander Wilson, I think I can manage." Sophie tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Mom, are you happy now?" Emma looked down at her daughter, then up at Wilson, then out the window toward the flight line where F-35 sat ready for another day of pushing the boundaries of human and machine capability. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm happy now." 2 weeks later, Emma Rodriguez, now Commander Emma Rodriguez, call sign Viper 1, climbed into the cockpit of an F-35C for the first time in 3 years. The aircraft felt familiar despite the time away, like greeting an old friend who had waited patiently for her return. As she ran through pre-flight checks with the methodical precision that had made her legendary, Emma thought about the journey that had brought her back to this moment. The years of hiding, the casual dismissals, the quiet competence that had been overlooked by people who couldn't see past their assumptions. But also, the daughter who had taught her that happiness was worth pursuing, the wingman who had refused to let the past stay buried, the commander who had recognized that some mistakes deserved correction. Tower, Viper 1 ready for taxi. Viper 1, cleared to taxi runway 27. Welcome back, Commander. Emma smiled inside her helmet as she guided the F-35 toward the runway. In the distance, she could see Lisa's F-22 waiting for takeoff, ready to join her for a training mission that would test both aircraft and pilots against the kind of challenges that separated good aviators from legends. For 3 years, Emma had accepted that her flying days were over, that her contributions to naval aviation were limited to loading ordnance and maintaining aircraft systems. But some talents were too valuable to waste on the flight line, and some legends refused to stay grounded. As the F-35's engines spooled up to full power, Emma Rodriguez felt the familiar sensation of acceleration that had defined the best moments of her professional life. The aircraft lifted off the runway with graceful power, climbing toward a sky that had never really stopped being her natural element. "Viper 1 airborne," she reported to tower control. "Copy that, Viper 1. Good too. Have you back where you belong?" Where she belonged. In the cockpit of a fighter aircraft, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, serving her country at the highest level of technical and tactical competence. The ghost of Viper 1 had been called back to life, and this time she was staying. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and courage, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the spirit of service alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and who's the quiet warrior you'll never forget.